In the spring of 2018, we decided we're going to buy our first home. Our son Xavier was 4 years old, and he was going to go to TK that fall. So Anna had one rule: anywhere but inside the Los Angeles Unified School District. We looked at a few communities, but then really, really fell in love with Pasadena and the foothill communities. We always had good memories of Pasadena: Rose Parade, Rose Bowl, nights in Old Town. So it was pretty natural. As we explored more, though, it was the funky sister city up north, up in the foothills, that was really, really drawing us: Altadena. And we didn't know a lot about Altadena. We parked there a couple times to go on some hikes in the San Gabriel Mountains. We knew that the homes were a little more affordable. But other than that, it was kind of new. And so it was fun. We went to a bunch of open houses. And it was early in that process that I first heard the word unincorporated. We were checking out a house on Parkman Avenue, just east of Lake, a stone's throw from Farnsworth Park. It was a beautiful yellow Spanish architecture home. Old, vintage, 2 stories, a little funky, pretty cool, just like Altadena. I walked in and I grabbed the one sheet from the realtor. Went out to the deck, because that's kind of the area that always draws me. I looked at it, had an immaculate view of the Los Angeles basin. You could see downtown. I bet on a nice day you could see all the way to the ocean. And I looked at the one sheet because I wanted to see how much it was, just to confirm I probably couldn't afford it. And something else struck me. It said it was only 1,200 square feet. Now, I've never been good with square feet, but it was 2 stories and it was really big. And I felt like we had just come from a 1,200 square foot home that was much smaller. So I went over to the realtor. I said, "Hey, I'm sorry, but it says this is 1,200 square feet." And he laughed. He said, "Well, only 1,200 square feet of this home is permitted." I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "Well, Altadena is unincorporated. And so a lot of people take advantage of that and build additions, finish basements, and they just don't get them permitted." Now, I'm an entrepreneur and a lifelong rule breaker. So when I tell you this was cool to me, that's an understatement. I was in. Yeah, maybe we buy a house, put an addition on, don't ask permission from anybody. That sounds cool to me. Well, we didn't get the Parkman house. Okay, I think pretty sure it went for like 300,000 over asking. But we did get our home about 4 months later, and we moved in September, and we lived there for 6.5 years, right up until the Eaton fire. And it's funny, the word incorporated just didn't come into our daily lives that often. Like, we'd see from neighborhood groups, there'd be little issues of the day that, they were the way they were because we're part of county. But I don't know that I really knew what it meant. And part of me still doesn't really know what it means, and I've been researching all week. I just know that right now, when we feel so stuck as a community, being unincorporated kind of sucks. And it's where we start this story, because we are stuck. We are in a place where the government's not really working for us. And I wanted to learn a little bit more why this was. So I brought on Tom Hogen-esch. Tom is a tenured professor in Cal State Northridge. He's been studying local governments for over 30 years and is, you'll see, just absolutely brilliant mind who understands why the state is the way that it is. And through this conversation, I came in thinking a lot about how I felt about being unincorporated and where I thought we might go. And Tom really opened my eyes. It made me realize that no matter what we may want or think or dream of, we're unincorporated, and we're going to be for quite some time. I'm Austin LaRoche, and this is the Altadena Rebuild, Episode 1, Unincorporated. Professor Hogen-esch, or as I sometimes call you, my friend Tom, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Austin.
I'm so happy that you're here. I'm really excited to learn more today. And so let's just dive into the most obvious question we have. What is an unincorporated community in Los Angeles County?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and maybe the best way to answer it is to say, what is an incorporated community? So all of the United States is covered by counties. There's no part of the United States that's not covered by a county government. It's kind of the de facto local government that covers, the United States, although the services can vary. Like in Florida, where I grew up, the counties did education. But in the West Coast, particularly California, school districts are their own separate governments, right? And there are a whole bunch of reasons for that. But there's also reasons why communities become incorporated, right? And in a corporation, as you know, you're a businessman, offers, right, lots of advantages. And in particular for Americans of, say, the 19th century, Americans went from living like they were camping, right, with no electricity, no water, no sewage, and so forth, to like living in modern America. So incorporation allowed access for people to raise money through issuing bonds. Now, I don't want to get super technical here, but once you issue a bond, you're borrowing money to pay for roads and electricity, perhaps, and garbage and all of this stuff. And of course, counties are providing those services as well as we get into the 20th century. And then the other thing that incorporation provides is control over land use. And this becomes a really big part of the reason why communities incorporate in California in, say, the middle 50s. As California is beginning to grow rapidly, as all the people from around the country are moving here, communities are seeking control over land use typically to prevent densification and to protect the single family nature of communities. And that's a whole nother discussion about
Wow.
housing, affordable housing.
I did not know the NIMBYs went all the way back to the 1950s.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. It's deep.
Very.
So when you're unincorporated, right, you don't have a local government with the exception of the county. Now, you and I have both spent time in Florida, and, Florida doesn't have a lot of big counties with the exception of, say, Jacksonville, Tampa, Orlando, Miami. And so, the county government in Gainesville, where I grew up, and I know you're an FSU man, the county government, you could just walk right in. You could see your county representative, in the grocery store. In Los Angeles, we have 10 million people. And so we have 5 representatives representing 10 million people. So each one of these board of supervisors represents 2 million constituents. Now, recently, I'm sure, sorry, just one more point. Recently, the voters of LA County have voted to expand the board of supervisors to 9. And so by the 2030 census, we will then be almost doubling our representation, but it's still going to be, like much bigger than a state Senate district. So sorry, we're getting too far into the weeds here.
I'm really excited to dive into some of that, especially because as I was doing my research for this, I was like, wait a minute. So our district supervisor has all of this under her jurisdiction? Oh my, she's got no chance. But we'll get there in a second. Let's go back to Altadena specifically, being unincorporated. What are the pros, and let's say pre-fire, what are the pre-fire pros and cons of our unincorporation?
I would say the biggest pro is money. So when you incorporate, you want to have a full service city like Pasadena, right? So Pasadena has fire and it has police. Roughly 80% of a full service city's budget is gobbled up by fire and police.
Hmm.
80%, right?
Yeah.
So a neighboring city like La Cañada, right, is in some ways similar maybe to Altadena. It's incorporated, but they don't have the full slate of services. They don't have their own fire, and they don't have their own police. They contract with LA County
Hmm.
to provide those services. And so the reason why they incorporated was because of land use, right? They wanted to make those land use decisions and keep that sort of single family, keep out low income housing. I mean, La Cañada is a whole nother story on that front.
Wow. And so, as I guess we saw in the fire, we have seen some of the cons, just not having nearly as much representation. But one of the things that I discussed at the top is I never felt like the unincorporated aspect really interfered with our day to day lives until the fire. So, like, even like as we look beyond, and there's obviously a lot of options, and we'll get to what some of those are. Like, did you ever feel? I'm going to ask you to put your citizen cap on for a second. Uh, did you ever feel like, oh my gosh, I just can't get what I want because this town's unincorporated?
Yeah, as a homeowner, most of the zoning, I don't know what percentage, but the vast, vast majority, probably 90% plus of the residential zoning in Altadena was for single family homes. And LA County never really, pushed the densification of Altadena. Had they pushed the densification of Altadena, people would have gone ballistic, right? So there was this development on Lincoln Boulevard in Figueroa, kind of near our kids'
Hmm.
school. And,
Yeah, I'm
that
familiar.
took years. That was like a battle for years just to get that one. I don't know how many units are there, maybe 40 or 50.
Hmm.
And so, Altadena was fairly well protected by LA County, right, by the County Board of Supervisors as a single family community. And so for residents, there was no real difference, right, between having incorporated. But, as a business owner, I think things are quite difficult in Altadena to get permits done, to get somebody within the planning department to respond to your emails. But I can't speak to that that's just kind of stuff that I've heard secondhand.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, as neighbors, we hear about these things. So let's talk about the structure that we kind of hinted at the top. So we have five county supervisors. Ours is her. She's an elected official named Catherine Barger, right? And I don't want to do too much Barger bashing here in the show because I feel like she has a very tough job, and it's much easier to complain about all the things she's not doing. Although if we turn the cameras off and have a cocktail or two, I can probably have a long list of complaints of how things have gone. But with all that said, she oversees Altadena, and she oversees at least 10 other unincorporated areas as well, over 100 miles of land, as I saw. But still, we have this Altadena Town Council, and there's 16 people on it, and it's just kind of an advisory board. Tell me about that
Yep.
relationship between the county supervisor and the town council.
Yeah. So first of all, Catherine Barger is not sitting around, wondering what's happening in all these little unincorporated pockets. I mean,
Mhm.
Altadena is big. It has a lot of, people who are influential living in Altadena. So I think, we're probably on the radar screen. She shows up to these events, like we had the around Christmas time and so forth. But really the way that local governments run is the bureaucracy, right? The decisions are being made, by the planning department or, by, much of what counties do. Sorry, much
No
of what
worries.
counties do is to provide social services. So what, a myriad of welfare programs, healthcare programs, those are the big ticket items that counties provide that cities don't. And
Hmm.
so, Barger is looking at these big issues on a day-to-day basis. And what's happening in Altadena is really people paying attention would be her district representatives. So I forget the name of the person. I've called her a few times, and they are pretty well on top of, something. I remember there was in our neighborhood, we have a lot of people of different income levels, and there was one house that had a lot of trash just piling up, and it was in the driveway like a mountain of trash for a year.
Oh my
Now that
gosh.
wouldn't happen in San Marino. That trash would be gone in an afternoon in San Marino. I mean, San Marino, where I'm living now, if you park your freaking car on the street at night, you'll get a ticket.
Yeah, and so I think that unincorporatedness definitely led to a little bit of that wild, wild west mentality, right? I talk at the top about how when I was looking for a house, there was it was explained to me from realtors that there's so many just parts of homes just were not permitted, and nobody just seemed to care, right? Finished basement or ADU addition, yeah, it's just not permitted. And to your point, you could see these other cities, these Pasadenas, these Sierra Madres, and there are all those sort of rules and there are all those sort of consequences. So I think that kind of plays into that idea of like, hey, it's nice to have the government out of your hair, dot, 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 until you really need them. And I think
Such a
that brings
great
us to the
summary.
fire.
Yeah. And, another element of this kind of approach to local government that we have here, Austin, is the fact that Altadena is carved up into 3 small water districts. So we had the Lincoln Avenue Water Company, and that was over on Mendocino. And if you walk into the Lincoln Avenue Water Company, there's one dude sitting behind some glass. You can't really. You're like, hey man, can I pay the bill? And he's like, oh yeah, sure, whatever. And this fire really sort of underscores, because a big part of fighting fires is having a water system that works. And I think this fire really exposed the inadequacy of the system of local government, both the lack of fire protection, the lack of a functioning water system during these fires. I mean, even the city of LA over in Palisades, they didn't really have a functioning water system for the Palisades. And so, these are the big questions about how to move forward, in Altadena and elsewhere. Man, that fire could have happened anywhere.
I
That fire.
know it's one of the jokes in my family because I don't know if it's jokes. I don't think anything's that funny right now. But we chose to evacuate before there was a fire, just because we had not really got a good night's sleep the night before. Our neighbor's palm fronds were kept landing on his car from the wind, and it was like it's supposed to be twice as bad tonight. Like let's just like go stay at a hotel down the hill. And Anna was very worried about everything. She brought passports, and I'm like, kind of, I don't want to say I'm laughing at it, but I'm just like, it's okay, like, come on. And then all of a sudden, the spark happens in Eaton Canyon, but which that spark could have happened anywhere among 15 different foothill communities, and whatever community was at the bottom was going to get torched. Like it was an act of God, or I guess if you're a religious person, you might say an act of the devil, because it was unlike anything I'd ever seen living there for 6 years. But yeah, to your point, it could happen anywhere, and unfortunately for us, it happened in our unincorporated community of Altadena. But
Yeah,
I
but
think that
it kind of gets back to your question, like, had it happened in one of those communities that had their own fire department, would things have been different? And I'm not in a position to answer that question, but I'm pretty darn sure the answer is yes. Because Austin and how many stories have you heard of 80-year-old man and his son fighting the fire with a freaking garden hose and saving not only their home, but 5 other homes around them? I mean, if an 80-year-old man with a garden hose can save his home and 5 others, I wonder what a functioning fire department could do.
I mean, that's a really good point, and I really do feel like that response would be different. And even what is interesting is earlier when you were talking about our neighbors at La Cañada Flint Ridge and how what was the phrase, they lease the fire and police services
Contract out to
contract.
the county.
Uh,
Yeah.
what's the difference between when you contract that out versus like when you just have a couple small stations up there in the foothills?
Well, we do have that fire. I mean, there was a fire department just a block and a half from our house
Yeah.
on Lincoln. And that's a county fire department. And I don't know La Cañada well enough to know where they're, but they also have county. So the county taxpayer is the one, 10 million people are paying for those services, as well as the salaries, as well as the benefits. So when you talk about that 80% of a city's budget going to fire and police, there are substantial costs to having that full service approach. And so what cities like La Cañada and many others do is that they don't want to pay those high level of taxes. And so they just simply contract out with the county. And so in some ways they have, kind of a hybrid system, right? Of partly municipally run and municipal control, and then partly controlled by the county.
So one of the things that keeps confusing me as I dive deeper into everything, we talk about how our school systems don't necessarily align with our cities and what's incorporated and what's not. We break our actual unincorporated town into 3 different water districts. Everything seems to be in flux. Our county supervisor relies on all sorts of different agencies. And then our governor tweets right after the fires that he's going to get rid of all the red tape and bureaucratic nonsense so we can rebuild fast. Who is this system like benefiting? Who's happy with this system?
Yeah, it's a great question. When you look at the sort of big picture of the way that the United States is governed, we have one national government.
Sure.
We've got 50 state governments, but we have 90,000 local governments. And so Americans have sort of set up this system over the last couple centuries, right, where we want government to be close to us. And, I got my start in this profession looking at a movement in the San Fernando Valley to break away from the city of Los Angeles, which is a massive a city of 4 million people. It's like 500 square miles. And so the residents of the city of the community of San Fernando Valley, which by itself would be the 4th largest city in the country, by the way, had they been successful in breaking away, they wanted to have more local control. And so there are advantages to that. And then there are also advantages to having, large fire departments that, can, work with water, the Department of Water and Power to, fight a fire like this. And so one of my big questions coming out of this fire is LA County has a budget of $50 billion. It might even be a little bit higher than that. That's up there with, countries around the world. How is it that there weren't more fire engines up there in Altadena? You also have contracts. So the county makes contracts with governments to help during fires. And so during an emergency, you'll have, the city of Pasadena will come up, or the city of Los Angeles, will respond. And my guess is what happened is that the Palisades fire happening earlier that day took a lot of those resources over on that side of town. But I mean, they're doing some investigations. I don't even, the county has hired some consultants or whatever. I want to know answers to these types of questions because
I was going to say what you presented earlier, where these incorporated communities, 80% of the budget is going to police and fire. Well, I think we've all looked around LA County, and it certainly doesn't feel very safe. And we just had 2 attempts at a massive wildfire to see what our state of the art fire departments could do, and unfortunately, they were all limited. So to your point, like not only is it baffling that our budget isn't like this, if so much of our resources are going into fire and police in the budget, and we're getting absolutely no representation. How do we untangle this mess?
Yeah, the situation is very strange to me that the county, as big as it is, should be able to fight 2 fires at one time. And by the way, the city of Los Angeles also has an extremely high budget for its own fire department. And so, the county, it's not clear to me. I don't have a lot of insight on exactly what happened. We need to figure out what the timeline was, but it sounds like the city of LA was caught flat-footed that day. And so the county had to send resources, and that left fewer resources for Altadena. But that story still doesn't quite make sense for why so few resources were sent up the hill to fight the fire in Altadena.
Yeah, and going back to my original question about like who wants it this way and who does this benefit, are we just in one of those scenarios where it's like, oh, this is the way we've always done it. This is kind of what we've let it evolve to, and untangling it would be so much harder than just kind of moving forward with this stupid system?
I'm not sure I understand that question. Say that again, Austin.
Sorry. I guess what I'm getting at is it's obvious that we've had a very bureaucratic government for a while, and more things keep getting added, and we're doing things because we've always done them this way. And I'm wondering if we all just take a couple steps back and say, why is it this way, and what can we do to untangle it? It seems like the idea of completely overhauling something that isn't working sounds like way more of a difficult challenge than just kind of going on as is. And so are we just keeping this system because it's in place, not because it's the most ideal, not because we're really like trying to optimize it, just because it's the one we have?
This sounds like a case study from a business administration text. And I don't really know, how to answer that. I mean, how would you design a fire department, from the ground up, if the current system did? I have no idea.
I'm going to ask it another way. You're a professor.
Okay.
You know a lot about local governments. Where do you feel like in your research, citizens are very happy with their government from local, state to federal, if that exists?
Well, I mean, you're kind of, it's a loaded question right now. It's a little bit of a fraught time in our politics. But if you
Sure.
ask the middle and upper middle class and wealthy communities, Sierra Madre, on down to Duarte and Glendora, and then come down to San Marino and Arcadia and the single family neighborhoods, even in Eagle Rock, people will tell you, yeah, things are fine. I mean, Elon Musk and that crowd have a totally different philosophy, right? Move fast and break things. And they think that if you just completely upend what's been created in the bureaucracy over the last 100 years, that's going to like save people money. I don't think that philosophy is going to work either. Altadena, we have the system that we have. The big question for Altadena is, do we want to incorporate?
We're getting there.
And if we do want to incorporate, do we want to go for a full service city? Because it doesn't really make sense to incorporate without being a full service city, in my view. Although, as I mentioned before, the land use governance, could become a big issue as whatever developers move in and they want to densify, and people will begin to get quite angry about changing the level of density in Altadena. So I think,
So
those are the
let's,
big questions going forward for Altadena.
yeah, I think, as we rebuild this community, and it's like we have like these dreams of like, and we'll talk about different options, one being incorporated, one being annexed by Pasadena. None of that could ever come to fruition before we rebuild all of this. So we are kind of stuck being unincorporated. But as we've now gone through this disaster, I don't think the citizens love the status quo. That's not what I've seen. I see this. We finally kind of go back to my joke earlier. Everybody hates government until they need it, and we really need it, and we don't really have a ton of it right now. Or maybe just because we're all displaced, we don't feel like we have it. It's working for us, and we're going where we want to because this is just going to take some time. But I want to talk about the idea of incorporation, because I know that we've actually tried, Altadena has in 1957 and 1965. Each time the measure lost about 2-1. And so I started just kind of like trying to research what, because everyone says it's so expensive. And what is this process? And I probably don't know all these steps as well as you do, but there's a feasibility study, then a petition, then a review by local agency formation commission, and then a public hearing. And then we'd have to go to a vote. All that, why is it that hard beyond just having to go through all those steps? Like, what are the difficulties in incorporating?
Really, the difficulties surround money and whether a city can sustain itself financially. And that's the purpose of the LAFCO, the Local Agency Formation Commission. These were created in the 1970s and then updated during the 80s, but to try and find some regularity to a system that had been too Wild West. So it was very easy to incorporate prior to the local agency formation commissions. All you needed was like 200 people and a vote. And so you could just create your own city. And so, the question does get back to money. And it's so expensive to have a city that you don't want to be creating a lot of cities that can't sustain themselves financially.
Mhm.
And
And so I
so
want to
that's
break
really
that down a little, because I keep hearing about how it's so expensive. So where does that expense come? Is it our property taxes? Is it our local retail and the taxes there? Like where are we spending that money? Where we're like, oh my gosh, we're spending way too much money to be incorporated right now.
So it's a great question. And I almost hate to go down this path, but it gets back to one of the most momentous propositions in California history, Proposition 13.
Mm-hmm.
So Proposition 13 was part of the anti-tax movement in the late 70s in California.
Mm-hmm.
And it had a lot of impacts on services, but it basically took a local tax, so ones that cities had, and it made it a statewide tax. And then cities and counties and school districts and what are called special districts could get a portion of the property tax. So the property tax is actually a state tax of which the local governments get a tiny little portion. And that resulted in what's called the fiscalization of land use, meaning that cities could no longer use the property tax as kind of the workhorse of local government services. And so they had to rely upon retail. And so the cities that began to attract lots and lots of retail. So you, Austin, you're traveling family. You've been up to Camarillo before on the 101. You come
Yes.
down the Camarillo grade, and on the left-hand side, you see all of those outlet stores.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you go down to a place called Cerritos and the Cerritos Auto Square, I forget how many.
I bought a car from in Cerritos before. Yes.
So Cerritos is a very middle-class community, but they have luxury city services because of the retail sales tax. They take 1% of every car sale that happens, and that raises tremendous funds. So circling back to Altadena, we have nothing like that. I mean, we've got like a grocery outlet there's 5 people in it. We
Yeah.
have no tax base in Altadena.
Yeah, and I know it's going to change, and we maybe touch on that in a minute. But we don't need a whole commission for LAFCO to tell you that there's not enough people buying deodorant on the unstocked shelves at the local Rite Aid right now to to really be able to make incorporation feasible. And it's really interesting that it is going to lean all on that retail side, because I have high hopes for the retail in Altadena. Let's maybe more 3 to 5 years out.
Yeah.
Especially when it's full of new construction homes, and it's just a changing community. I think that retail will be better, but that's like getting a Starbucks or a Chipotle. We're not going to have car dealerships and outlet malls to bail us out.
No, that's
So
right. And so we will see kind of a gentrification of the business districts, I think. And I think that will generate some more commercial activity. But I just don't see, just looking at the way that the land is zoned on these major thoroughfares. I guess Lake Avenue would be the major thoroughfare, and then Lincoln, but the border of Pasadena is Woodbury. And so when you go up, Lincoln from Woodbury, there's really not that much there. I mean, there's just not enough to sustain Altadena as an incorporated community, even if I think we contract with LA County for those big services.
And so for our listeners that are not local, what's on the other side of Woodbury?
You mean as we're going north or south?
South. We cross Woodbury south. Where are we now?
Yeah. You're in Pasadena.
We're in the city of Pasadena. Now, the city of
Yeah.
Pasadena is incorporated. And earlier this year, one of their council members, Tyrone Hampton, he suggested Pasadena could annex Altadena. So first, I want you to put the professor hat on. What does that mean, and how would we be annexed by Pasadena?
Yeah, so I would have to double check some of the LAFCO rules, but just my sort of gut level reaction is that both Altadenans and Pasadenans would have to approve the annexation. So we would have a vote. I think of all the options, remain unincorporated, incorporate, but then have to generate a bunch of sales tax, I think joining Pasadena, at least from a local government services perspective, is probably the best option for Altadena, if indeed we want to have more attention paid to those services like police and fire. Now that will come with higher taxes, right? These full service cities, particularly older cities like Pasadena, have higher tax rates, higher property taxes, especially, but other taxes as well. And so if you want more services, you'll have to pay more for them.
Which, I don't think anybody would mind if they felt like, hey, all the budget's going to police and fire, so now we're paying more, but we're feeling a lot safer. And I think whether you're incorporated, unincorporated, right now with everything going on in LA County, I don't know that we feel like that taxation's giving us that representation. And I want to talk a little bit about the dynamic of Pasadena and Altadena, particularly for anyone who's not local. So Pasadena is like the oldest son, blue blood, got the scholarship to Yale, is a rower there, very handsome, like historical. People from all over the world know it. And Altadena is like the cool funky brother that like maybe like fronts an indie band. He doesn't care as much. He doesn't not a real shirt and tie kind of guy, that likes to be kept alone, but really neat and eclectic, right? I think that's probably the fairest I can give to a metaphor that makes sense. And so I know there's been talks over the years of potential annexation, and to your point, both Altadena and Pasadena would have to vote on it, right? So it's almost like, if I want to extend the metaphor, like when the parent dies, getting everybody on the same page with the will here. And there's just, decades upon decades of different small types of tension that I feel like would make that quite the endeavor. And it would almost take something as unique as the Eaton fire to even start this conversation? I mean, would you kind of more on the neighbor hat side? Is that like your read on the situation?
Yeah, no, I think any major disaster like this is an opportunity for major reform. But if you're a resident of Pasadena and you're looking up at Altadena, which looks like freaking Hiroshima, why are you thinking, yeah, we need to annex that place? I'm going to vote for that. What would be in it for the residents of the city of Pasadena? I'm not sure that's going to be a very easy sell. If Altadenans, as we repopulate Altadena, are in favor of that annexation, I'm not so sure if city of Pasadena residents are going to go for it.
I love that you said that, because I think today you're 100% right. I'm going to go back to my original thesis that anything that we ever did to change wouldn't happen until after the rebuild. But while they might be looking up at Hiroshima in the foothills right now, 2 years from now, they're going to look at streets upon streets of new construction, homes that are more fire resistant than any others in the entire area. A lot of the homes that are being built are going to be from lots that have been sold to people who can afford $700,000 in cash and then build a house that they're probably going to try and make a profit on. So Altadena in 2-3 years is going to look completely different. And I think it's going to, what the dynamic will change is that it will look desirable to Pasadena. But at that point, do we want to join?
Well, I still think Pasadena will be hesitant, right? And in particular because of the lack of infrastructure. So city of Pasadena has its own water and power. It's municipally owned water and power. And by the way, they have some of the cheapest rates in the country for electricity, right? Way, way cheaper than Southern California Edison. And I can barely even mention those words, Southern California Edison. It just makes me so angry. But imagine, Austin, if the Department of Water and Power had to redo a lot of the water infrastructure and take over underground infrastructure in Altadena, what that price tag is going to look like. And why would city of Pasadena residents say, like, yeah, there's this gentrifying community up there. There's a lot of funky, modular homes that are people putting up there. There's a lot, I just don't see people in Pasadena, taking us in, and then they have to deal with us, right? We're like you said, the guitar players.
Yeah, we're gonna show up to Thanksgiving dinner in flip flops. They're gonna have to apologize for us.
Well, let's also sit on Altadena's history as a historically Black community. Okay. Right, and particularly West Altadena, because the biggest impact, I think, on this fire is not for the folks like you and I who moved there relatively recently and who had high levels of insurance, but rather those families who came after the end of the racial covenant system, which had prevented African Americans from living in large swaths of Southern California. Those families moved up in the 60s, 70s, and 80s and bought those houses and lived in, a middle class life. And it's no coincidence that those were the families who were fighting those fires with the garden hose, because they knew that they were not insured to the level of rebuilding, or maybe they just had a gut level sense, that if I don't save this home now, it's not going to be there for my kids and my grandkids. And so the biggest, I think, impact and tragic impact of that fire is really on the Black community and in Altadena, and I really, when you hear these stories, and you really get the sense that it's going to be really hard for those families to rebuild, and that's a shame.
It's one. I'm glad you called that out. I wasn't sure when in this whole series I was going to kind of talk about the difference of being like, new to the neighborhood, in a place where I feel really well insured, and in a place in my life where I feel like I have the energy to rebuild and can, after all of the feelings of devastation, actually feel excitement, right? Because, individually, I know that I can and will get there. But to your point, my heart breaks for everybody who is not going to be a part of this. And we're going to have future episodes with real estate agents and, really talking about just what a different community it's going to look like. And it's going to be one, I very much believe is going to be very fluent, and whatever we can do to help those people is we have to do. And I think I want to kind of bring this back to being unincorporated and feeling like we're not really getting any government support. What might that look like? What might be different if we weren't in this unincorporated space and we had all of these neighbors who really built the neighborhood on their backs, and they were underinsured, and now it looks like they might not be able to come back? Is there anything that we could have done more had we been incorporated, or, if the funky brother and the blue blood brother had gotten back together years ago?
I don't think so, Austin. There's this bumper sticker up there in Altadena not for sale. Everything's for sale. I mean, you're a businessman. Everything is for sale. It's just, that's just a slogan. I don't think there's much meaning behind it. I think your question is really, what can government do to prevent speculation, real estate speculation up in Altadena? So let's say a developer wants to come in and buy land. The developer wants to densify that land as much as possible to increase the profits. The county also has an interest in creating more housing, right? And more affordable housing. And so the county might actually be interested in greater density for Altadena. And then people like you and I and others, we're not interested in having a neighborhood where you have single family home, 50 unit stucco apartment, single family home. I mean, I don't want to speak for you, but I mean, that's not why people moved to Altadena in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's that, the NIMBY and YIMBY, yin and yang, right? That part where you want as many people as possible to be able to be a part of this rebuild. You want the renters who were there to be able to afford to come back. You want all of those things, but you also moved out of a city to be in a neighborhood that is, has a lot of trees and a lot of families walking, and it's just a different experience than, the just even before I lived here, living in LA in an apartment, right? It's just different areas that with different intentions of its neighbors, who are there.
And also just the amazing architecture, Austin, that, I would walk around the communities and neighborhoods, your neighborhood, mine. We lived in Jane's Village. I mean, all those cool Jane's cottages, and then all of this great architecture. It just crushes me, to see all of that gone. And then you just wonder, what is it going to be replaced with? And then, government, we want government to make things easier. And then we also want government to make things harder, and not, so you can't just put up a stucco dingbat, or, whatever, some cheap house or whatever that's not going to last through the next big shaker, or, And so government is in such a difficult position in this rebuild on questions like how much regulation, how much density are we going to allow? It's just, I don't have a whole lot of hope that this is going to be like an orderly process. I think we're looking at a number of years, probably 10, before it's anything kind of like a community that, again, it's in some ways, maybe I'm being too pessimistic. I don't know.
Hey, your house burned down a couple months ago. You can feel however the heck you want to feel. I think I think just even through some of the early things we've seen from government, and it has been a little underwhelming, but I think that we have the opportunity to rebuild this our way. as citizens and homeowners and people who are in that position to be able to come back. And I think we're bringing up a lot of the issues that are going to be important for everybody to consider as we try to rebuild this community and get as many people back as possible. So before we go, my last question, just because, I mean, this has been amazing. I feel like I've gotten such a great history lesson and local California government. I also feel like everybody, between all the talk of agencies, taxes, and bureaucracy, any of my friends from Texas who left to California in the pandemic, they're just like kind of nodding along right now. But given you have so much knowledge on all of these things, what is somebody like myself who might not be loving our situation with the government here in the post-fire situation, what should I be asking a brilliant political science professor to make me feel either better, worse, or just more informed about how this rebuild's going to look?
You know, the big question above all of the ones that we've talked about today is climate change. And the fact that we were looking at Category 1 hurricane force winds on the night before the fire as well as the night of the fire. And, you know, as we said before, had that fire sparked in Sierra Madre or La Cañada or Duarte or Glendora and on, you know, it happened in the Palisades on the same day. I mean, we are living in a totally different reality. And, you know, Californians, people like we want to be close to nature. We like being away from all of the traffic. But, you know, I wonder whether does it make more sense now to be thinking about living in a community like Reseda in the middle of the San Fernando Valley, where your fire danger is much lower, and that, you know, living up next to those beautiful mountains can come with major costs in this new era of climate change, where the climate is doing stuff. I mean, none of the old timers in our neighborhood, Austin, thought that the fire could ever sweep down all the way to Woodbury. I mean, that's like 1.5 miles and could just take out 7,000 homes. And that's the new reality that we're living in. And not to end on a, but I mean, where do you go? You know, there's not, I mean, look what happened to Asheville, North Carolina.
Wow. Yeah.
They got pounded by a freaking hurricane.
Yeah, I think what I do, my little protection mechanism that I do is I look through the lens of these hurricanes, and I think to myself, wow, gosh, Hurricane Andrew in the early 90s destroyed part of Miami, and Hurricane Katrina in 2005 came in and just destroyed New Orleans. Houston had one in the mid 2010s. And I go, you know what, though? It's been over 30 plus years since that Hurricane Andrew. It's been over 15 since New Orleans. We've obviously still have hurricanes. Does lightning strike twice? And I think for us, we got to pray that the next time the winds come, it's not our power lines this time that start catching fire. It's somewhere else.
I mean, I don't think it'll happen in Altadena again. And, you know, incorporating so that we have a fire department, so that they're up there in the foothills. I mean, it might not even make sense, right, to incorporate for that reason, because all the houses are going to be built to more fire prone. But you know, the thing that I'm really concerned about long term is, I mean, you see fires now in Denver this week, and you know, Canada had a couple summers ago thousands of forest fires. I think it was about 5 years ago. They had 85 deaths in British Columbia from heat wave. And so that's the kind of stuff that keeps me up at night, is that we are now living in a different climate reality. And, you know, you wouldn't know that from listening to the politics, you know, of the American politicians, or even really local politicians.
Yeah, and I think I'm gonna spin this into a positive here. We're gonna end on
okay,
this.
yeah. And you and I are yin and yang here.
and you're right. Yeah, we are going to face, you know, these awful disasters, and these disasters do hit They hit Democrats and Republicans, and communities know this. But what's cool to me is that, like anything else, when you get knocked down to the mat, you always have the opportunity to get back up. Santa Rosa was destroyed in 2017. It's got beautiful rebuild homes, beautiful communities that came together to rebuild, that maybe they didn't even know each other's names before the fire, and now they're there. They trauma bonded. You know what trauma bonding with your neighbors is like.
I sure do.
And I think there is a different and new community that's 2 years away, and let everybody else argue if it's going to be better or worse. But this community, they're going to get back on their feet, and just hope to God in our lifetimes we don't see another fire wipe it out. So, but if it does, we're going to get back and rebuild again, because that's just who we are as the weird indie rock brother of Pasadena. Did I bring it home? Did I bring it home? All
Brought
right.
it home, Boston.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tom, this was amazing. I appreciate it so much.
A lot of fun.